100,000 years ago, someone dug a hole in the ground. Inside it, they placed a body. Then they placed something else beside it. A handful of red ochre, a shell, a piece of antler. No animal on Earth had ever done this before. What were they thinking? What changed inside a human mind that made digging that hole feel necessary? The answer reaches into the deepest parts of what makes us human at all. For nearly 4 billion years, death on Earth looked the same. An organism died. It was eaten, decomposed, or simply left where it fell. Nature recycled the body without ceremony. No species paused. No species marked the spot. Then, somewhere between 100,000 and 130,000 years ago, that pattern broke. The site is called Kafsa Cave in modern-day Israel. Archaeologists excavating their found human remains deliberately placed in pits, some accompanied by red ochre pigment and animal antlers positioned beside the body. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a body that simply fell into a crevice. This was a choice. Why does a choice like that matter so much? Because burial requires something almost no other animal has. It requires understanding that someone you knew will never come back. Elephants will stand over a dead herd member for hours. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for days. Crows gather around their dead in what some researchers call funerals. But none of them dig. None of them bring an object meant only for the dead. Burial with grave goods is something else entirely. It requires imagining a future that includes the deceased, even though they are no longer present. That is not memory. That is something closer to belief. So what was actually happening in the minds of these early humans? Researchers point to 3 overlapping explanations, and the evidence suggests all 3 were happening at once. The first is practical. A buried body doesn't attract predators. It doesn't spread disease. In a small community living in close quarters, hygiene alone may have been reason enough to start digging. But practicality doesn't explain the ochre. It doesn't explain the antlers. It doesn't explain why some bodies were buried in a fetal position, knees pulled to the chest, as if returning to the position they were born in. That detail shows up again and again across burial sites separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles. The second explanation is emotional. Grief is not unique to humans, but human grief appears to be uniquely complicated. We don't just feel the loss of a person. We feel the loss of a future with that person, the conversations that will never happen, the years that will never be lived. Some researchers believe burial began as an act of closure, a physical ritual that helped the living process what their minds could not otherwise resolve. A hole in the ground became a boundary, a place where loss could be set down, even if it could never be fully released. The third explanation is the most unsettling: belief. At some point, early humans appear to have started believing that something continued after death. Not provably, not consciously articulated in any way we can recover. But the grave goods suggest it. Why place a shell beside a body that can no longer hold it? Why place food, tools, or jewelry beside remains that will never use them again? The simplest explanation anthropologists have found is also the most profound. They believed some part of the person was still going somewhere. Have you ever wondered what red ochre actually meant to these early humans? Ochre is an iron-rich mineral pigment, deep red or orange when ground into powder. Archaeologists have found ochre at burial sites across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, often predating burial practices themselves by tens of thousands of years. Some researchers believe ochre symbolized blood, and by extension, life itself. Applying it to a deceased body may have been an attempt to symbolically restore what had been lost. Others believe its deep red color simply marked significance, a way of saying, this body matters, this moment matters. Either way, the choice to use it wasn't random. It was deliberate, repeated, and intentional across cultures that had no contact with one another. By around 30,000 years ago, burial practices had become remarkably elaborate. At the site of Sungur, in modern-day Russia, archaeologists discovered the graves of 2 children, buried head-to-head, covered in roughly 10,000 ivory beads each. Producing that many beads by hand, using tools available at the time, is estimated to have taken thousands of hours of labor. Thousands of hours. For 2 children who would never wear those beads in life. What kind of grief justifies thousands of hours of labor for the dead? The Sungur burial suggests something extraordinary. By 30,000 years ago, death had become not just an event to mark, but an event worth devoting enormous resources to honor. Neanderthals complicate this story even further. At the site of La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, researchers uncovered a Neanderthal skeleton, an elderly individual with severe arthritis and missing teeth, positioned in what appears to be a deliberately dug pit. For decades, scientists debated whether this was truly intentional burial or simply natural sediment accumulation. More recent excavations, led by researchers including William Rendu, used advanced soil analysis and concluded the pit was almost certainly deliberately excavated. If Neanderthals were burying their dead, then symbolic thought, grief, and possibly belief in something beyond death are not unique to Homo sapiens. They may be older than our species. What does burial tell us about the moment humans became human, not biologically, but psychologically? Some anthropologists argue that burial marks the emergence of what's called theory of mind taken to its furthest extreme. The ability not just to understand that others have thoughts and feelings, but to imagine a continued existence for someone who no longer has either. That is an enormous cognitive leap. It requires abstract thinking. It requires symbolism. It requires the ability to hold a belief that cannot be tested or proven. In a sense, burial may be the first piece of evidence we have that humans were capable of faith. Today, burial practices exist in nearly every human culture on Earth, even ones with no historical contact with each other. Cremation, burial, sky burial, mummification, the methods differ wildly, but the underlying impulse is nearly universal. We mark death. We do not let it pass unacknowledged. That impulse connects you, right now, to a person standing over a hole in the ground 100,000 years ago, placing a shell beside someone they loved, for reasons they likely could not have explained even to themselves. Here is the part that should stay with you. Burial isn't really about the dead at all. It never was. It's about the living refusing to let go in silence. It's proof that somewhere in deep prehistory, before language was fully formed, before writing existed, before religion had a name, humans already understood something that no other species on Earth has ever grasped. That love doesn't end when a heartbeat does. It just changes shape.